when the Atlantic staff writer Michael Shearer asked Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to sit for a series of interviews about his life, his views, and his many, many controversies, the Secretary's staff warned him against it. The so-called establishment press, they said, would never allow itself to be impressed with Kennedy's revolutionary ideas about American health and science. But Kennedy, to his credit, let Shearer ask him anything. The result is this month's Atlantic cover story, which provides what I think is the most revealing look at Kennedy's robust effort to undermine and even overthrow whatever is left of the American medical consensus. Michael Shearer joins me tonight, as do two other reporters who know more about Kennedy and about the American government's enormous health infrastructure than almost anyone else. Dan Diamond, a White House reporter at The Washington Post, and Julie Rovner, the chief Washington correspondent for KFF Health News. Thank you all for being here. Michael, thank you for writing this story. It's a very long story. Boil it down in 30 seconds, if you could. Tell us, after spending months with RFK Jr., multiple interviews, a lot of travel, what did you learn about this person who is very famous already? What did you learn about him that you didn't know before?
I think, what I realized was what we do know about RFK is really the caricature. He's caught in this daily battle between people who think he's destroying science or people who think he's taking on the establishment. He's anti-vax, he's crazy as a brain worm. He put a bear in the back of his car at one point. But no one, at least I had read, had tried to really explain how he got from being the guy who said that George W. Bush was a fascist, who was a Kennedy, FDR liberal, to being someone who now considers President Trump a sort of hero of his, and how he got from being at the edge of the Democratic Party, sort of kicked out almost, to being HHS secretary. I think the answer is he's a fiercely determined person who is on a quest. He's on a real mission, and he has been able to sort of plow through enormous obstacles and enormous detractors and really not lose faith in his own vision of what he's doing, despite, his family, his friends, most of the people who work for, or many of the people who work for him or worked for him, saying he's wrong.
You wrote, the whole medical establishment has huge stakes and equities that I'm now threatening, and I'm shocked President Trump lets me do it. Why does President Trump let him do it?
The president sees real value in Kennedy. There's a political value. They're going to try and put MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again movement, front and center next year for the midterm elections. They think they can peel off Democratic voters with it. For Trump, a Kennedy, a Kennedy for Trump is like a magazine cover. It's a big deal for him. And I
have to think that one through, but okay, I get your point. Yeah.
He's bragged about it. He's bragged about having a Kennedy in his cabinet.
And also,
well, the outsider has the ultimate insider working for him.
Right.
That's right. And they both have this sort of populist, we're going to burn down the establishment approach. The other thing is that Trump, even before Kennedy kind of came into his life, did have a sort of vaccine skepticism thread to his thinking. Well, he was concerned about autism, and Kennedy tried to answer those questions for him.
Yeah, let me come to that as a White House correspondent. We don't think of Donald Trump. I don't think Donald Trump would argue at this point as the paragon of healthy living and healthy eating and healthy exercise. I don't think he actually believes ideologically in exercise. Talk about the attraction between the two men. Was it simply that Trump saw, I could pick off a very prominent Kennedy and put him in? Or does Trump have developed ideas about the health infrastructure of our country that I'm not fully aware of?
Well, Michael's right that there was a political appeal, especially in an election that was thought to be close. But the two men in some ways are kindred spirits, where Donald Trump, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., they're of similar age, they have been in the public profile, and they have believed similar things. Donald Trump in his first term wanted to do a study of autism and vaccines. He was talked out of it by Bill Gates, by his senior health officials. In this administration, he's got RFK Jr. in his ear, letting him pursue these things. There's also an aspect, too, of RFK Jr. has his own political base. He is not one of these anonymous cabinet secretaries. He's someone who does have movement behind him. And that movement people in the White House think helped bring them the election last year,
Yeah.
think it'll bring the midterms next year.
Julie, talk about that movement a little bit.
Yeah, I've been covering particularly the anti-vaccine movement since the 1990s, and what I think people have not appreciated is both the far right and the far left on the anti-vax movement. It's been sort of the far right libertarians, if you will, who don't believe in expertise, and then sort of the far left, what I call the crunchy granola eaters. So MAHA is.
And there's this crunchy con over that they meet somewhere.
That's right. Well, it's a circle that just goes all the way around
Right.
and meets at the other end, and they've become a more powerful force, really, I think, over the last 10 years or so. And I think Donald Trump and his advisors saw a chance to help grab that force that Kennedy has helped put together.
How big a movement is it?
It's still a minority. And in fact, it's still a very small minority. It's just a very loud minority. And one of the things we know from, the rise of social media is that they can get their message out much more effectively than they ever could before. And so more people are seeing it, and it's so in confusion. We saw it obviously during the pandemic when nobody knew who to trust on anything. And this, sinking trust in anyone who's an elite or an intellectual or professes to know more than anybody else. It's like we all have access to the same megaphones now, therefore all of our knowledge must be equal.
And a lot of people believe we have access to the same information, although the quality of the information is obviously what we're going to be talking about. But let me just stay with you for 1 minute, because I want to talk about Kennedy's actual impact in the world, because I think it is huge. I mean, he's making changes across the health infrastructure of our country. Julie, what are you seeing at agencies like CDC and NIH, and what are the consequences of the things that they are doing under Kennedy's leadership right now?
They've been hollowed out. I mean, there's just no other way to put it. Between the people who took the early retirement, people who sort of saw the handwriting on the wall and just took retirement in general, people.
Wait, time out. What did the handwriting say?
The handwriting said that science is no longer going to be our leading force, that politics is. That basically, for a long time, HHS has had this sort of level of political, overreach, but most of the scientists have been left to do their scientific work. And there's been a history under Democrats and under Republicans. I've been covering HHS since the 1980s, to basically let the scientists do their thing and let the politicians worry about what impact that might have. And clearly this was an administration that came in that wanted to clean house. And people, I have friends, I live in this area, who said, I'm getting out while the getting is good. So they took these early retirements, or they got laid off, which also happened. So we're seeing about a reduction of a quarter in the number of people who actually work for the Department of Health and Human Services.
And one interesting point is that President Trump in his first term didn't care about these issues the same way. He kept the same NIH director, Francis Collins, who'd served Barack Obama. That's impossible to think about now in this much more politicized environment.
Right. Come back to the CDC. I'll ask Dan in a second about the FDA, but talk about the CDC. Obviously a crucially important agency. It's a national security agency in a lot of ways. It tells us when diseases are erupting and gives us early warning, among other things. How have they been affected by Kennedy's thinking?
Basically, all of the scientific leadership has been wiped out at the CDC. They're all political people now who are running the CDC and determining what the public health message is going to be. And that's a big difference. Dan wrote about this a lot during the pandemic, in the first Trump administration, but it's a factor that's so much bigger now, that there's basically the CDC is kind of a shadow of its former self.
Michael, why? Why?
So Kennedy's view is that the health establishment that he's dismantling is responsible for our current health situation, which is not great. A rise in chronic disease, concerns he believes that are valid about vaccine illness, neurodevelopment problems. He has significant concerns about the role of industry in government administration. And he has basically decided, I mean, when I spoke with him, he talked about the CDC as a snake pit. That's how he described his own employees there. He talks about biostitutes working for him, because they're selling themselves to the highest bidder as they do their medicine. And he also said to me at one point that they left because they can't defend the ground they're standing on. It is a full-on war inside that agency. And I think he is convinced that there are still parts of the bureaucracy that are actively working against him that he wants to root out.
Who then, Julie, is going to tell us when there's an Ebola outbreak and what the course of that Ebola outbreak might look like if the CDC has been hollowed out?
That's the big question. And obviously, the Trump administration has also taken down all of its participation in some of these international health organizations. That was the way we would get the early warnings about things like Ebola, about things like COVID, and we're no longer part of those organizations. States are trying to pick up some of the slack. Universities are trying to pick up some of the slack. We're seeing in public health some of these states banding together to make things like vaccine recommendations. So we've got this, sort of patchwork of places, a blue state coalition and a red state coalition. But this is a big difference, since the CDC sort of really came on the scene in the 1940s, we've always had sort of a national public health understanding, and that is going away.
Dan, talk about the FDA, which is another crucial agency and has been the gold standard across the globe for many years, crucial agency in the HHS portfolio.
So FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, oversees our food, our drugs. I mean, it's in the name. All of these things that touch our daily lives. And it hasn't been in the spotlight the same way as the CDC, but you see similar dynamics. Earlier this year, RFK Jr. fired the CDC director that he had signed off on after about a month. She said she didn't want to rubber stamp his vaccine policies. That attracted a lot of attention. I know you talked about it on the show, Jeff. Lawmakers, even in the Republican Party, were concerned. There's a similar dynamic.
Well, not that concerned. I mean, to be fair.
In some ways, more concerned about this than we've seen them about other things with this, this administration. There were several Republicans, John Barrasso, who is not someone that you normally see.
And there's certainly Republican doctors in the Senate who are concerned about what's going on. That is true. But anyway, go on.
Well, and Republican staffers and senators who've said off the record they're deeply worried. But point being, we've seen this dynamic at CDC. FDA hasn't gotten as much attention, but there are very similar themes happening there too. We reported at the Washington Post last week that the top drug regulator, someone that has been at FDA for years, was just tapped to be in this major role, he too is now worried about the pressures being put on FDA, worried that the political goals of RFK Jr. are taking precedent over doing longer research, longer studies.
What's the political pressure, specific political pressure that this person is receiving?
There are a couple. So the Trump administration wants to lower the price of drugs. Good goal, bipartisan goal. And as part of that, they have offered essentially a lure to industry, that if you sign on to cut your drug prices, we will expedite your other drugs. But
the expedition process has been science-based, right? Data-based.
It has been, you mentioned earlier, Jeff, that this has been a model for the world. It is a long process that can take months, a year. The Trump administration has said they can cut that essentially to a month. And they make it a smaller panel of reviewers.
But how would you do that safely?
That's the big question. That's what the head of the drug center is worried about. It's also, the question is whether a lot of these things are even legal. Congress generally makes the policy. These types of policies, they go through a debate process. You hear from experts on both sides. This is not something that's normally just done by a secretary or an FDA commissioner. This administration has just sort of blown through the guardrails, and Congress has let them.
And just to pull it back to a second to what Michael was saying, there are some things that RFK Jr. has pushed as ideas that are bipartisan. You can read the transcript of some of his remarks, and it looks like what Bernie Sanders would say on taking on industry, on making drugs more available. It's just the process by which this is happening, or actually the lack of process, is what's causing concern.